You may have always been told that the best way to improve your writing is to read. And I'm about to tell you that is not entirely true. Welcome to the Cat Scratch Writing Center, everyone. My name is Athella Novella, and in this workshop series, I talk about writing and give you guys tips and tricks. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about some things that you can do to make your writing better, literally immediately. None of this you should read and write and practice crap, okay? Because if you don't do the things that I'm about to tell you about, your writing is never really going to get better, or you're going to progress and improve very slowly. So, let's go ahead and go over 10 different ways to instantly improve your writing. Tip number 1, get rid of fluff words and stage directions, alright? Words like that, I think, of, etc. can all be taken out of your writing. Including them really only slows down your writing, and it kills the pacing, and that ruins the reader experience overall. You want to pay attention to words that can be taken out of a sentence without taking away from the meaning. A good example is the sentence, "I went out of the window." It makes sense, it's grammatically correct, there's nothing really wrong with it, but saying "I went out the window" instead is much more concise and a lot easier to read, and it means the exact same thing as before. Getting rid of getting rid of that fluff word, immediately made it better and easier to read. Not to mention, it's gonna save you precious words if you have a limit to your word count. Stage directions are kind of harder to find, but they follow the same rule as fluff words pretty much. If you've never heard of stage directions before, basically what that phrase means is writing that denotes every little action a character takes. It's things that seem like instruction instead of narration. A good example that I have been personally guilty of is narrating how characters do things. So a sentence like, "She got up to leave the busy restaurant, pushing her chair in and grabbing her things, dodging around servers and customers until she reached the front door." That sentence, this is one that I've written, by the way. This sentence is full of stage directions. Pushing her chair in, dodging around servers, reach the front door. It's all obvious. Everything in the sentence can be implied, alright? We know which door she's going to leave through. There's only one door she can leave through. Typically in restaurants, you're only allowed to leave through the front door. So we can get rid of that. We also understand that the restaurant is busy. We can imagine what a busy restaurant looks like. So saying that this character has to dodge around people is also kind of irrelevant because it's already implied. So we can get rid of that. And same thing with grabbing her stuff and pushing the chair in. It's implied that she does that before she leaves. How else is she gonna leave if she doesn't take her things with her, you know what I mean? So we can leave that out too, and we can simply reduce the sentence to, "She got up to leave the busy restaurant." That's it. That's simple as you need it to be. That's really all you need. It means the same thing, and you got rid of all the things that slow it down. And that's kind of what you want to look out for when you're looking for stage directions and looking for things to cut. On to point 2. Please, 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 don't be afraid to use the word said or say in dialogue. And please do not use actions as dialogue tags. Your teachers are going to tell you all the freaking time to use anything except said, and I hate them for it. I hate your teachers for it. They said that to me. They're so wrong. They're lying to you. They are literally bluffing to your face, okay? You want to use the word said or say in your dialogue. It is the most basic dialogue tag ever. If you are using any other tag that isn't said or say, you're doing it wrong. You're not using it enough. Said or say should always be the most used dialogue tag in anything you write. We'll go ahead and look at an example that I would kind of consider meh writing. You know, it's not bad, but it could be better kind of thing. "I told you not to look through my stuff," she screamed. "Well, you left it sitting on the table," he retorted. "That doesn't give you the right to go through it," she shouted, waving her arms. "It wasn't yours." "Then maybe next time you should take better care of it," he scoffed. "I'm not listening to this," she sneered. Now, there are a couple things wrong with this conversation. Most of it is grammatically correct. However, The dialogue tags being all different makes it very hard to read, especially if the text continues like this. And typically, writers who write like this are going to continue to use screaming synonyms, and the dialogue tags are going to get more convoluted, more complicated, and might come off as a little pompous or conceited. And you don't want your readers to think that you are a pompous asshole, alright? It's also implied that the characters are arguing and shouting because we're using exclamation points, and because of the angry words. You can also tell that they're arguing, that they're not happy, that they're probably shouting because of the tone. Really, we don't even need to use any of the screaming dialogue tags at all, because the screaming and the shouting is implied in the actual conversation. Most of these tags, pretty much all of these tags, actually, we don't even need. And so we can just use said instead, alright? However, there is one thing that is actually incorrect with this sentence, and that is the use of scoff as a dialogue tag. When you're writing dialogue, the easiest way to tank the quality of your work is to use action verbs instead of speaking verbs. Scoff is not a speaking verb, and I am guilty, I'll admit, I'm guilty of using scoff as a speaking verb all the time, but it's not a speaking verb, and neither is sigh, shrug, grin, or anything remotely similar. You can't speak while you're sighing. You can't speak while you're scoffing. You can speak while you're shrugging, but you shrugging is not what's making you say the words, you know what I mean? They are their own actions, and in a lot of cases, their own sound altogether that are completely separate and independent from speaking. So you need to avoid using action verbs in place of speaking verbs. Simplest way you can avoid this is just use said or say. Just use said or say. If you want to use action after dialogue, you can. I would recommend you really only do this sparingly, but you can do it, and this is how. We'll take our old sentence and we'll say, then maybe next time you should take better care of it. He scoffed. It is so much better. If you're gonna use action after dialogue, you need to end the sentence. You can't combine the two with a comma. You have to separate them because they're their own separate actions, alright? So please don't connect it with a comma, because then you're gonna be doing something that's actually incorrect and not physically possible. So now that we've been through all of that, let's go ahead and rework the conversation. I told you not to look through my stuff, she said. Well, you left it sitting on the table, he said. That doesn't give you the right to go through it, she replied, waving her arms. It wasn't yours. Then maybe next time you should take better care of it. I'm not listening to this. Now see how much better that sounds. The most important thing to understand about dialogue tags, like said, replied, and asked, really simple dialogue tags, is that the reader is gonna try and skip over them. The only important thing that you really need to gain from dialogue tags is determine who is speaking. Knowing who is speaking is more important than knowing how they're speaking, because you can show how somebody is speaking through context clues. You don't even necessarily need a dialogue tag. You just need to know who's saying what. So readers are pretty much always going to skip over your dialogue tags anyway. It makes it much easier to read because when they see a complicated dialogue tag, it's going to trip them up. Another thing you'll notice that I did in this example is the last two sentences, I completely got rid of the dialogue tags. And this is something that you can do and that I highly recommend for two-person conversation after you've already established who is talking and in what order. Removing dialogue tags once people know who is talking and who is saying what makes your dialogue cleanest. Because, like I said, your reader is gonna skip over dialogue, so you don't even need dialogue tags in the end anyway. And that also saves you from using said over and over and over again. Kind of in the same vein, on to point number 3, please, for the love of God, split up dialogue from your paragraphs. This is also another way to make your dialogue really hard to read. Dialogue is most easily understood when it's separated. It is easiest to digest and read it when it's separated. When you put dialogue and action together in the same paragraph, your readers then have to do 3 or more things. Thing number 1, remember who is talking and in what order and who is saying what. Thing number 2, keep track of who is talking at the same time that they're trying to understand what characters are doing things. And number 3, could get confused on who is doing the talking or doing the action and getting lost in trying to keep track of it all. This is an example of what you do not want to do. I need to go to the doctor's office today, I said. I grabbed my things from the table by the front door, shouting across the house to my partner. He emerged from around the corner to see me off. I'll be back around noon. This paragraph, as it is kind of confusing, and it's a great example of why you really need to separate dialogue and action. The main problem here that I can see is the second to last sentence in the paragraph. He emerged from around the corner to see me off, followed by the dialogue tag. If a reader is not paying attention, then it could easily be inferred that the partner is now saying they'll be back home around noon, not the narrator. Obviously, you can tell that the narrator is saying this. You could use context clues and reread to figure it out. Obviously, it's already been established the partner's not leaving the house, but it's still confusing, and you shouldn't have to reread something to understand something or to make something clear. You want to make it as clear as possible when you're writing. So let's go ahead and split it up and see how it improves. I need to go to the doctor's office today, I said. Shouting to my partner across the house, I grabbed my things from the front door table. My partner emerged from around the corner to see me off. I'll be back around noon, I added. Already, it is much clearer who is saying what and who's doing what, and it's easier to digest. As you can also kind of see, I went ahead and implemented our earlier points of cutting out fluff words and then rearranged the sentence so it made sense, and even that improved it further. The key to good writing, and I'll let you in on a little secret, the key to good writing is making your work easier to read and understanding how reading works fundamentally. When you have a paragraph, that is our brain's signal to pay attention to that paragraph's details. We've learned that everything in one paragraph is all related and is all one idea, and we should pay attention to it. Your brain doesn't really process and put away the information in a paragraph until that paragraph is over. So when you have dialogue, then action, then more dialogue, all in the same paragraph, it's difficult for the brain to keep track of everything at once, absorb what's going on, and understand what's happening, especially for people who are neurodivergent. As much as the actions may seem related to the dialogue, I promise you, they are not. They are their own thing. What characters are saying and what they are doing are two different ideas, two different concepts, and two different things happening. So they gotta be separated. Which kind of brings me to my next point in point number 4. Don't be afraid to keep your sentences and your paragraphs short. The more information you have, the more important it is to relay it in a concise manner so people understand what's going on. Keeping paragraphs and sentences short isn't something that's necessary. You don't have to do it, but it's something to be aware of as you write. And if you come to the point where you can only relay some information in a 5-word sentence, don't feel like you have to make it longer. I don't care if it sounds like simple English, and I don't care if it sounds simple in whatever other language you read or write. Your short sentences will always be better than that same sentence that you tried to make long that didn't really need to be long. So don't be afraid to keep your sentences short. And another reason shortness is a good thing, on to point number 5, is you want to vary your sentence structure and spice up your writing. Varied sentences are what's going to keep your writing from sounding simple, not the length. Some short sentences are going to balance out long sentences that you have that may come before or after, and it's important to separate long sentences up because if all you're reading is long sentences after long sentence, they can get hard to read and difficult to read and kind of annoying. So sometimes start sentences with independent clauses. Maybe use a dependent clause after that or something like that. Maybe throw in a semicolon. Join 2 sentences with a semicolon. My favorite grammar punctuation mark. Use semicolons. Write one sentence with 5 words and then write another with 15. You know what I mean? Vary it up. Spice it up. Do things differently. And of all the things on this list, this is probably the one point that I will say will get easier when you read and write more, because you're going to expand your vocabulary. You're going to learn different ways to write your sentences so that it gets easier to vary them as you're writing rather than going back and fixing them during the editing process when you're done. That being said, simply being aware of your variety is one step further to making it a good habit. So just be aware that you want to vary your sentences, and that's going to make your writing really, really stand out. Next up, on to point number 6, something that is a little bit more concrete. Use gerunds and adverbs very sparingly. Your teachers and professors have also probably said this. Unlike their rule about the word said or say, your teachers are right about this point. Gerunds and adverbs are gonna kill your writing when you use them a lot. If you don't know what gerunds and adverbs are, gerunds are words that end in ing. They're ing words, basic verb forms. Things like singing, walking, sighing, moving. Those are all gerunds. Adverbs, if you don't know what adverbs are the ly words, so words that end in ly. Basically, slightly, half-heartedly are all adverbs. Now, before I move on, I do want to be clear. You can use these words, and you should use them. Honestly, these words are kind of necessary. You will always find a situation where a gerund or adverb fits the writing the best. And when you're in that situation, you should use the word. Don't think that because gerunds and adverbs are bad sometimes that you should never use them. And don't be afraid of using them because you think that using them is going to make your writing worse. If an adverb or a gerund is the best word to use it. The key word with gerunds and adverbs is moderation. When you use gerunds and adverbs over and over and over again, that's when your writing could feel a bit juvenile. You want to use the skills we just talked about in varying your sentence structure and varying your vocabulary so that you don't rely on using gerunds and adverbs all the time. A thesaurus is your best friend, guys, okay? Don't use big words that nobody understands, obviously, but you can always find alternatives to using things like really great, really this, really that, every other sentence. For point number 7, you should be as specific as you can. And this one kind of goes without saying. I feel like a lot of writers understand that you should be specific, but they don't know how you should be specific. And that's where the problem lies, because a lot of people think that what they're writing is specific, and it's actually not. And this is why. When you write, you want to avoid using words or phrases that can be interpreted in multiple and different ways. 2 words that come to my mind that fit this category, the words conservative and liberal. Those words conjure up very specific images in our mind. The problem with those words is they're different images depending on a person's understanding of them. One person might think a conservative is a wild, crazy Trump supporter who loves guns and fishing, and another person might think that a conservative is just a regular dude or someone who is more withdrawn and traditional. It's the same word, but you get 2 completely different, not only descriptions, but meanings. And the entire tone of and understanding of the piece changes simply because your readers can interpret this one single word 2 different, kind of opposite ways. Not to mention, depending on who reads your stuff, you might offend somebody. And you should seriously avoid offending people if that is not the purpose of your writing. If you're just writing like some fantasy book, you should avoid using words and phrases that are gonna offend people and that are going to make people upset. You want to pay attention to the words or phrases that you use so that you can convey a very specific meaning that can't be interpreted any other way and that also won't piss someone off unnecessarily. Using ultra-specific phrases and comparisons instead fixes this. And I'm talking about things that cannot, no matter what, be interpreted in any other way than how you are writing it. So something like sweat tasted like seawater or the garbage smelled like freshly bloomed dogwood trees are very specific images that most people understand. You want to be aware of your audience when you come up with these phrases because some people might not know what seawater tastes like, so you might have used salt water instead because pretty much everybody knows what salt water's like, right? Also, seriously take advantage of the 5 senses. This is where you can really let those wonderful literary device skills that you've practiced shine. This is where you can make your English teacher proud, okay? Use the 5 senses, take advantage of the 5 senses, and Using the 5 senses is also how you're going to get these ultra specific comparisons and phrases. When you use the senses to come up with specifics, you seriously and majorly change the effectiveness of your writing, because most people experience the same senses in the same way, and it's very powerful when you're able to take advantage of that and kind of manipulate the senses in writing and in reading. One of my favorite lines I've ever used with regard to the 5 senses, and you can feel free to steal it from me since I stole it from someone else, is wet paper stuck together like hot feet against cold linoleum. That is a very specific image, and it cannot be interpreted any other way. It's wet paper really stuck together, and pretty much everybody knows what it feels like when your feet are hot and sweaty as hell, and they're sticking to cold surfaces like linoleum or tile. And those are the kinds of things you want to stick to. And this is really important because, moving on to point number 8, it helps you avoid cliched phrases and helps you use your own unique comparisons. I know I've already said a couple things can make your writing feel juvenile or not as good as it could be, and I'm going to take all that back and say affirmatively that cliches are the best way to actually make your writing bad. You need to avoid cliches at all costs if you want to improve. If you do all the other things in this list but you still use cliches, your writing is going to suffer. If the only thing you do in this list is not use cliches, is follow point number 8, but you still don't follow any of the other tips, your writing's gonna improve. That's how important cliches are. And granted, thinking outside of the box and coming up with your own phrases does take time and practice. And it's easier to think of new things when you're older and or have more experience doing different things. But the more you're aware of it, the more you can actively work against it. And coming up with different unique phrases is actually a lot easier than it seems. And if you're somebody who struggles with it, this is how I like to go about it. Step number 1. Think of a cliched phrase. Can literally be anything. Any cliched phrase. For the sake of example, we'll go ahead and use still as stone. Step number 2. Put that cliche in your writing. For the sake of example, we'll go ahead and say, he was still as stone when faced with his bully. Step number 3. Now we're going to think of other things that are similar to your cliche. Since we're using still as stone, we would want to think of things that are also very still, frozen, rigid, stagnant, things like that. Step number 4. Once you've thought of some things that are the same, change the sentence. So now we could use something like, he was still as a wild rabbit in the face of his bully. He was rooted in place like a thick tree when faced with his bully. Or we could even use simply, his fear kept him stuck in front of his bully. What matters here is we're not using a phrase that everybody uses anymore. A good rule of thumb in determining if a line is cliche or not is think of whether or not you have heard it before, and if you have heard it before, how often have you heard it before? Because if you have heard it before and you hear it a lot, you should probably change it. Switching gears with tip number 9, you should write like your readers already know what you're talking about. A common problem I see with young writers, and this is something I am guilty of, I used to do it all the time, and I occasionally still do it even as a professional now, is info dumping. Info dumping is when you unload a whole bunch of information onto the reader without any kind of action or dialogue in between, and much of the information is either entirely useless in general or useless to the reader the moment it's introduced. Writing like your readers already know what you're talking about is a good way to avoid info dumping. You should really only reveal what is necessary for readers to know in the moment. It's harder to gauge from the writer's perspective because you pretty much already know everything. If you were to read what you wrote and then ask yourself questions, you'd have an answer for almost every question you could ask, or you might not have any questions at all because you already know everything in the back of your mind. This is also kind of why it's important to have beta readers and have people look over your work so they can catch things that you've missed. However, it is very important to practice putting yourself in the headspace of an oblivious reader and read your work or think objectively about your work. If you have a question, or you come up with a question somebody might ask about the piece, you should answer it in your writing because that probably means the information is important to know now. If you can understand the content currently as it is, but additional information could make it clearer, you probably don't need to include the additional information because you can already understand what's happening. Unless you do not plan on bringing that information up later, you probably don't need to add anything when you don't need to add anything. Additionally, you do not need to spell everything out for your readers either. If your readers have lots of questions about your work and they're not really answers that they need, your readers are probably just curious and they want to know more because they're interested and they're absorbed in what you're writing. And you should take that as a compliment because that's awesome when people want to know, like, the silly little things that are completely irrelevant to the main story. But you don't need to treat your readers like babies, and you don't need to detail every nuanced little thing or even define things. Your readers can look something up. The internet exists, guys. I know it's different for kids, but if you're writing for an older audience, grown adults are more than capable of looking up something that they don't understand, especially something that's considered common knowledge. So make your readers do work sometimes, alright? Simply pretend your readers already know what you're talking about, already understand everything that you're writing about, and if the majority of readers are confused, then you can add more information. Otherwise, you should probably leave it alone. And finally, tip number 10, do not edit as you go. Wait until you're finished to start editing. This is something that I was insanely guilty of when I started writing. And even now, occasionally I will go back when I go and reread something that I've been writing to figure out where I left off writing. I will go back and edit while I'm rereading, and then that totally messes things up. Please do not do this. It is very important that you do not edit as you write. And the main reason why is because you want to edit all at once rather than as you go. Because when you edit as you go, it totally changes the tone of the piece, and you could add or remove details that you either did need or didn't need. It's important to be consistent when you write and when you edit. And if you're doing both at the same time, you're not really being consistent. You're gonna cause inconsistencies in the writing and in the content, especially if you're working on a longer project over a longer period of time, like a novel. Not to mention, editing your project before it's done is gonna kill you. This is how burnout happens, okay? And we want to avoid burnout because it is so easy to lose motivation to write. Less motivation also means your work suffers, even if you're implementing tips 1 through 9 or any other strategies that work for you. The work you put love and effort into is always going to be the best. And your readers can tell when you put love and care into something, and they can tell when that love and care doesn't carry over into the writing. Yes, your writing will always be better as you edit, and you might be tempted to make it better as you go, but you're going to make it worse before you make it better by editing at the same time. How are you even going to know what edits you need to make when you haven't even finished the project? You are not going to know what's wrong. Something is always going to be wrong when a project is incomplete. So always, always, always finish before you fix. You wouldn't put your child through intense tutoring before you even get their first school grade back, okay? So don't edit your work until you know what you're working with. And that's pretty much it. I hope I've been able to cover some bases for you guys and offer insight that you might not have thought of. I know I sure did not understand a few things on this list until I got to college and had it explained to me by my professors in great detail. So hopefully this helps you guys get a leg up as you improve, and feel free to leave comments with questions or insights of your own as well, just in case I missed anything. As always, if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, please leave a like and make sure to subscribe to me on YouTube for more. Follow me on Twitter for updates and stay in touch with my Twitch and TikTok for some casual content. If you guys have any suggestions for other workshops you want to see, feel free to let me know in the comments or on any other social media platform. Don't forget to bring your library card with you to the next workshop, alright? See you then!